You know, we've all done it. We see one or two things happen, and boom, we jump to this massive conclusion. Well, today, we're going to tackle that sneaky little error in our thinking. It's called a hasty generalization, and we're going to explore why our brains are just so quick to leap before they look.
But that brings up a really important question, right? When we're trying to make sense of the world, we have to simplify things. So, how do you explain a complex idea simply, without accidentally twisting the truth? Where's that line between a helpful shortcut and, well, a flat-out wrong conclusion? That's really the heart of what we're digging into today.
So let's start right there, with that very challenge. Because before we can start picking apart a flawed way of thinking, we need to have a really solid way of explaining things clearly in the first place.
Think about it. Any great explanation doesn't just happen by accident. It needs a plan, a kind of blueprint. So before we dive into the main topic, we're going to pull back the curtain and share the blueprint we use.
All right, let's lay out the essential tools we'll be using as we move forward. This is our blueprint for clarity.
First up, the foundation of it all, the 3 C's. Any good explanation has to be clear, meaning it's straightforward, no confusing jargon. It's got to be concise, just the key messages, none of the fluff. And finally, it has to be consistent, so the style and tone feels solid and reliable. This is our starting point.
But let's be honest, a list of principles can be a little dry. To make an idea really stick, you need more. You need tools that grab your attention, like powerful examples, real-life stories, and of course, visuals and animation that can bring an abstract idea to life.
Okay, blueprint in hand, let's get to the main event. We're going to apply this exact framework to our topic today, a really common logical trap called the hasty generalization fallacy. So here's the official, straight from the textbook definition. A hasty generalization is a logical fallacy where expansive conclusions are drawn from an inadequate quantity of examples or scarce information. Yeah, I know, it's a bit of a mouthful. Sounds pretty academic, doesn't it?
So let's use our blueprint and make that clear. In other words, it's the classic error of jumping to a huge conclusion way too fast based on way too little evidence. See? A whole lot simpler?
Now that we've got a clear and concise definition, let's see what this thing actually looks like out in the wild. Remember those tools for engagement we talked about? Well, there's no better way to understand this than with a really concrete example. Let's use a simple animated illustration. Just imagine for a second that you see one single green apple. That's it, just one.
Now, based on this one tiny, solitary piece of information, this single data point, your brain gets to work trying to figure out a rule for this thing called an apple. And there it is, the leap. You proudly conclude, therefore, all apples must be green. It sounds completely ridiculous when we spell it out like this, but trust me, we all make smaller versions of this same logical jump every single day.
Or hey, think about this scenario. A student chats with, say, 3 of their classmates. It just so happens that all 3 of them loved the same obscure movie. So what does the student do? They assume the entire school must be obsessed with that movie. It's the exact same flawed logic, just in a different package. A tiny bias sample leading to a massive and totally inaccurate conclusion.
So the big question is, how do we avoid falling into this trap? Well, really understanding how this flawed process works is the absolute first step to thinking more clearly.
When you really boil it down, the structure of this mistake is always the same. On one side, you have a teeny tiny sample size, one green apple, a few classmates. And on the other, you have this gigantic, universal conclusion. All apples are green, the entire school loves this thing. The error isn't the original observation. That apple really was green. The mistake is that wild, unjustified leap from some to all.
And this is why it's so important. Ultimately, when we form these sweeping judgments without enough data to back them up, we're basically creating a distorted picture of reality for ourselves. It's just a recipe for being wrong over and over again. And here is the coolest part of this whole thing. We just used a clear, solid blueprint to explain a flawed and broken one. Spotting this pattern in your own thoughts, in the news, anywhere, it's like gaining a superpower. The moment you learn to ask yourself, hey, wait a second, is the sample size big enough for that conclusion? You start protecting yourself from bad information and even your own brain's lazy shortcuts. And that leaves me with one final thought to leave you with. In our world of 280-character hot takes and 30-second viral videos, everything is about speed. So my question is this. Are we all being conditioned to make more and more of these hasty generalizations? Is this just becoming the default way we process the world? It's definitely something worth thinking about.